from the Birdwell Chapel's Church of Christ congregation over in Cottontown. As was mentioned, we were going to be talking about our mission trip to Honduras that we took with Latin American Missions out of Valdosta, Georgia. They run a good program. They go to Central America and they spread the gospel, and they've been doing it for probably about 30 years now. And we were able to go with them. Let's see if this works. There it goes. Okay. So I'm going to provide a review of the country of Honduras. I don't know how many of you know about Honduras, but I think it's actually a wonderful country located in Central America. Honduras is located beside Guatemala and El Salvador to its west, Nicaragua in the south, and the Caribbean, which is to the north and east, the Caribbean Sea. Honduras, it's about the size of Tennessee. So in perspective, you can kind of get a general idea. So you can literally drive across it in about 7 to 8 hours. Honduras is a tropical climate. It is pretty close to the equator. But while we were there, it was actually a little bit cooler than it was here. So it was actually kind of nice. I think down there, the highs were somewhere in 85, and the lows were at night about 68. And here it was about 95. So it actually felt pretty good. Honduras, it has plains and it has mountains. If you can see on the picture there, the mountains are very, very beautiful. You can get some very majestic views. I've seen the Alps, and I'd say that as far as the beauty of it, is in comparison. It doesn't have the rocky landscape. The mountains are a little bit more dirt type, but they are very, very beautiful. A little fact about Honduras is it's the second poorest country in Central America, which is part of the reason why we were there. Honduras, according to the CIA fact sheets, there's 4 reasons why it is the poorest. The first is from hunger and malnutrition. A lot of times they can only afford to eat maybe 1 or 2 times a day, and they're eating beans and they're eating rice, which is not the best staple to actually live upon. Every once in a while they'll get other types of food, more in the country areas, but most of the time that's what they're living off of. They also have a hard time recovering from natural disasters and from drought. They're still recovering from a hurricane that came in 1998. They just don't have the infrastructure to be able to come back from where they were. Then also, Honduras, the majority of the people live in 2 major cities. The capital city, which is Tegucigalpa, which you can see on the map there, which is the main city, and the other one is San Pedro Sula, which is more to the northeast or the northwest. And those 2 main cities is where the majority of the population live, and the other part is really a rural agricultural land base. So if they have droughts, it really, really hurts them. Another is high unemployment. If they have these droughts and when they have these natural disasters, they have a high rate of unemployment, which is really hard to live upon. I know a lot of the preachers there have a hard time finding work in their locations. So they have to sometimes move to other places, which will leave in the congregation. But another thing that causes, the 4th thing that causes it to be a poor country is the violence. Over the years, a lot of the narcotics industry has moved in. There's been a lot of gangs. It's really dangerous. And that has led to just a area of poverty that people cannot get out of. I know I have a friend from Guatemala who says that 5 years ago, Guatemala was a nice place to live, which is similar across all of Central America. And he says, but now it's just getting more dangerous and more dangerous. And I know many of y'all heard of people coming across the border trying to come here because of the violence that is occurring. But I would have to say, if you take away those things, Honduras is a very, very beautiful country. Like I said, the mountains are very beautiful. The landscape's very beautiful. The people are wonderful. They'll invite you into their homes. You can easily have a Bible study by walking around the streets, and they'll just say, come on in and speak to you. They're beautiful people. And the culture is very beautiful. It's a very family-oriented based culture. And I think Honduras is a hidden gem. As you can see on the where we went, in Honduras was we flew into Tegucigalpa, which would be the main city, and we went to the east, which was Danlí. That's where we stayed as our base. And we actually worked out of San Diego, which is very hard to see there. It's a little bitty city. It's basically a fork in the road, which is about 30 minutes from Danlí where we stayed. And that's where we based our campaign. So I was in part of the setup of the maintenance portion. And in the maintenance portion of the clinic, my job was to make sure that everything was set up and that everything was going to run efficiently and smoothly. And we had several different stations. We had as far as within, which Kenneth Kaiser will later talk about how they're running a clinic. But you can see here on the first day, these are the buses that we took everywhere. Everywhere we went on school buses. Now here's us loading those school buses with all our supplies. So we had to carry all of our supplies in the back of, we had 2 school buses that were assigned to us. And that's what we would take with us. And here's some of the men carrying, I think that's Tylenol. They were carrying Tylenol into the clinic. And our clinic was at this school here, which was Escuela Jose Trinidad Cabañas. This is the local elementary school. Now, this local elementary school is kind of an outdoor type school, was what we would see. As you can see there, it has 4 buildings that were in the shape of a block, and in the center was a flagpole, and everything worked around that. These buildings didn't have air conditioning, they didn't have fans, they didn't have anything. They were just block walls with tin roofs, and that's where the kids would go to school every day. And this is where we were set up and to run the clinic. And we had to try to work around the school as it is. So the school would be going on, and then we would be running the clinic, was the way it was supposed to be set up. But we ended up changing things, which was kind of fun. Here's us setting up a tent for the first day, getting everything set up so that the people could work under. Here's the local people bringing in chairs and bringing in tables for us to set up. And if you can see the guy in the white shirt with the stripes, that was actually the mayor of El Pasario, which was the county that we were in. He was the mayor helping out. He really wanted us there to help out the people. And this is the first day where we're setting up the pharmacy. This was the first time we set up the pharmacy. We actually ended up setting it up 3 different times. The first day we set up here, and then that night they said we can't set there because next day they'll have school, and that's going to be used for the school. So we had to move everything in to another building, which was actually the principal's office. And they said, well, you can't set up there. So then we ended up moving it to across the street, which I'll tell you about that in a minute. Here's Mia. She's Kenneth's daughter, helping move some of the medicines that we had stacked up. And this is another Macy, that Gardner, that was with us as well. And then this is my boss when I was there in the maintenance department. This is Winston. He's from around the Winchester, Lynchburg area. And these 2 people are from Virginia, and they ran the eyeglasses clinic. The gentleman that's there, he actually ran a business beforehand, sold his business, ended up buying, I think, 2,000 or 3,000 pairs of eyeglasses. 12,000? He bought 12,000 pairs of eyeglasses that he ends up storing. And he comes down here. But the first day, you can see, we set him up. He had all those glasses set up, which was kind of a nightmare on the first day because when the kids came in the first day, it was just a trial run, and they rushed them to get the sunglasses. And so then we started trying to get them all hoarded up, get them lined up. And then we said, hold on, you got to have your parents. So they went and ran off and got their parents and brought them back, taking them out of a Bible study, which was, so they had another horde with kids and parents, and we ended up having to make lines and create these lines out of some rope that we found. It was definitely fun. Then here's our translators that helped along with it. And then here's me holding down a slab, resting. The one thing in the maintenance is that if you're not busy, you're just kind of sitting around. And that was my my help, or my I guess you could say my partner there. John, he actually is an aerospace engineer, and we got tasked in the maintenance. If you notice behind me, that's a water tank that's up there. Because there, the water, they only get water about every 4 or 5 hours a day. Because they only turn the water on in certain sections of the country about every 4 or 5 hours, so everybody stores their water. So there was actually several water tanks around the school. Then the next day, we ended up moving the whole clinic across the street. So we had all these tents set up. We had all the medicine stored in the pharmacy. We had the doctors stationed. And then the next morning they said, hey, we're going to move everything across the street to the preacher's house because it's bigger. But the only thing we couldn't move was the registration because it was registered at the school. So in order to be legal, we had to keep it there. So everybody got together, moved the tents. We moved the pharmacy for the third time. Stored the pharmacy actually in the living room of the preacher at the preacher's house. So we were very gracious for him to do that. And here's some more pictures of them moving these tents. And here's a picture of where they would sit after we got it all set up. So what they would do is Kenneth will go through later about how they went through the registration, then went through the clinic. But here's one of the waiting stations underneath the tent. And here's Winston telling them how to get in, basically keep a line in the waiting area. And like I said, Winston's from, I think, Winchester, Tennessee. He's been going on these trips for about 5 years now. He was teaching himself on Duolingo how to speak Spanish. And his voice sounds exactly like Dr. Phil. And so he's got that, he doesn't have that rhythm of what they do when they're speaking Spanish. And so it sounds like Dr. Phil speaking to them in Spanish. And he understands them very well. He'll even hold Bible classes for those people who are sitting there. And so they'll be sitting there relaxed, and he's asking them Bible questions in his wonderful Dr. Phil Spanish. And there's my partner again, John. Another task that we had is making sure that everybody had clean water, access to that. So we'd have to change the water tables every once in a while. And then, like I said, here's me blowing bubbles. When the maintenance is not busy, we got to find something to do. So John and Winston went on crowd control inside the clinic, since there was a line outside the clinic. And so I got in charge of making sure people weren't going around a section of fence. So I grabbed some bubbles and I had a chair and played with the kids. So it was really fun. And here you can see the line that was going into registration. So the barbed wire fence was the side we were on where the clinic is. The dirt road was in between us, and then the line was backed up to be able to go inside for registration, in which they would go in there and then come across. And if you also notice, you can see the kids will be hanging on the barbed wire as well. They apparently are not scared at all. They learned at a young age how to play around barbed wire. And there's another picture of me blowing bubbles again. And another picture of me blowing bubbles. I had a lot of fun with bubbles. And another picture. So, and this is Donna Sophia. She was the granddaughter of the preacher, Miguel. And she would play with me with the bubbles whenever we weren't really busy. She's a very sweet little girl. And so, as you can see here, I'm carrying a bag of water. This is the hand washing stations that we had to set up outside of the restrooms. And what we would do is we would set up the camper showers, fill them up with water, put a little bit of bleach in there, and then that would kill any of the diseases that were in the water, because they have a lot of parasites in their water. If you drink the water, you can get Montezuma's revenge, as it's called, which is not fun. And here's us hanging the water outside those restrooms. And then this is the final day where we're actually packing up everything, getting it ready, to be able to be used next year. All the stuff that was used there will stay in Honduras at one of the local preachers' houses, so it can be used for next year. So as we're packing up, I would make little notes to the next year's campaign to be able to just remember. All right, and at this time, Kenneth Kaiser will come up and talk about the medical portion.
Okay, all right. So much to talk about, so little time. So we'll move fast. But as JR said, we went through Latin American missions, and this is a very well, as he said, very well organized old machine. I went for the first time 3 years ago, not knowing what to expect, but was very impressed with how it's ran and set up. And of course, the basis of the campaigns that we did this year is a medical mission. It's a medical mission. They do also other mission trips that are not medical, but this is medical related. And I like to, as I said before, it's kind of like we saw Jesus do while he was on this earth. Which he could heal. We cannot heal people. We try to help people, but he would heal people, which would bring people to him, would bring crowds, and then he would teach. And that's kind of the basis of what we're doing here. We're trying to help people. We're not healing them, but we're trying to help them. And that brings them to the clinic, as you saw the line a minute ago, outside the door one morning. And then they're very receptive. They're very receptive, much more so than unfortunately folks are here in America. They're very receptive to hearing the gospel. So, see if I can drive this thing. Okay. I'm going to have to cheat because I can't see very well. All right, we had 95 people total. Now that's including the folks who went from the States and also the Honduran preachers and their families that participated in the campaign. 969 people came through the clinic in 5 days, registered through the front desk, if you will. 960 people saw a doctor. Over 1,000 saw the pharmacy. And 4,700 prescriptions were given out. Now, I guess I should have mentioned to start with, I'm a physical therapist, and so this actually was my job, physical therapy. We try to do what we can on a short-term basis. But we saw 97 patients, and actually had a helper, which I'll get to in just a moment. And then JR mentioned the glasses, the sunglasses and the eyeglasses. Over 1,300 of those were given out. Okay, so here we go. You can see the line outside. We get there in the bus every morning. They're already lined up waiting on us along the wall of the school to get in. And as JR said, we had to keep the registration at the school because that's where we were officially licensed and registered to set up this clinic. So they would register across the road, and then they would kind of be shown across the road. First stop would be kind of like a nurse's station, if you will, vital signs and that sort of thing. And then after that, they would go to a waiting area that was shown a minute ago, actually, to wait on the doctors. Now, we were supposed to have 3, and unfortunately, one of the Honduran doctors had a family emergency, and so we actually were down to two doctors. So that kind of slowed things up a little bit, but we did the best we could. Okay, so this is across the road at the actual station where they're actually registering. Got a few pictures here, and then here's the nurse's station, where they're the next stop. And they're very patient. You know, we're used to being in a rush, and we're used to everybody being in a rush. And, you know, if you see people waiting in America, you're rushing because you figure they're going to complain in a minute. But they don't complain. They're not in a hurry. I think we're in a bigger hurry than they are. Now, this is a picture where one of our doctors was set up. And this is one of our other doctors. This actually was before we moved. This was the very first day across the road, still at the school. And another one of our doctors seeing a patient here. Zip through these. Okay, now here is the therapy station, if you will. I think this is actually one of the, I believe, is that one of the preachers? Not sure, but anyway, this is one of our patients. And again, we only seen them for 1 or maybe a couple of days. So, you know, you do what you can in a short period of time, but they're very appreciative of anything you do. The young lady, Mira was her name in the backdrop there. She helped me through the week, and she actually is about to go into therapy school, and she's working kind of as a therapy aide now, so she actually was a very big help. Okay, a couple more pictures. This actually is one of the local ministers. And a few more of the therapy. Another one of the local ministers who had an issue with carpal tunnel, and we're applying some tape here, which actually gave him temporary relief. Was not, again, not a long-term solution, but a temporary relief. That's a closer picture of that. Okay. And then another picture of the glasses. And again, as JR said the first day, the glasses are extremely popular with everyone, especially the sunglasses with the children. So you really have to have tight security there at the glasses station. Not that we don't want to give them out, but you don't want them all gone, you know, the first day. This is inside the pharmacy. Barry was the pharmacist. He's done many of these campaigns. He probably works harder than anybody there. He works half the night, I think, too, getting things ready for the next day. And then again, some of our pharmacy helpers that was helping out in the pharmacy. This actually, her name is Kelly, who works with us at Birdwell's Chapel. She's very fluent in Spanish, which of course is very helpful. And she worked at the outside the pharmacy, so as they gave the medicines to the people, of course, she was able to tell them how to correctly take them and this sort of thing. The more you go, of course, you find it obviously helpful to be able to speak the language. We do have great interpreters, young people who help us. But after I've been 3 years now, and every time I come back and say I'm going to learn a little bit, of course, it's easier said than done. But the Duolingo JR mentioned is actually, I've been playing with the past few weeks, is if you do it, like so many things, if you give it a few minutes a day, it's actually pretty easy to learn some basic Spanish. So maybe when I go back next year, I'll know a little bit, maybe. Okay, and there's more waiting at the pharmacy, and now I think we're ready for Jason. No? Still me. Oh, I'm sorry. I can't see. Okay, eat. We like to eat. I don't know how to forget this. We ate very well this year, very well. Every meal. We'd have breakfast at our hotel before we would drive over. Of course, we would have lunch there on site. This is what this is here. And then we would have, of course, our evening meal back at the hotel again, but always almost a buffet style line here where you go through. And now again, if you like that sort of food, I guess. I'm not picky, and it was good, and it was very plentiful. This is the lunch line. It doesn't take very long to form. Everybody would see them bringing the food in, and the line would get long fairly quickly. And this is one of the local minister's wife who worked, I think, day and night, heading up the cooking, because this was an all-day project. When you're cooking for 80 or 90 people, 3 meals, you know, or 2 meals. Breakfast was served at the hotel. But anyway, 2 meals a day for a group that big was a big undertaking to have all the food prepared. And again, find a spot, you know, wherever you can. Look for a shady spot to sit down and eat right quick. We kind of do it in shifts somewhat, of course, so the whole clinic doesn't shut down for everybody to eat lunch at the same time. We kind of stagger it a little bit. And this is at the motel. The evening meal, kind of just like a huge fellowship hall, maybe a little bigger than this auditorium. And now, that's it. Now I'll turn it over to Jason.
I was the newbie. I was the one who'd never been out of the country. I'd never been to a mission trip before. These gentlemen had. I didn't have any special training. I'm not a medical person, but it's important for you to know that. You don't have to have medical training to go. There's a spot for everybody to do something, whether it's organization, working in the pharmacy as a pharmacy tech, you know, just pulling things off the shelf. So there's something for everybody to do. In past years, they had a little bit of an issue, just a minor issue, where people wanted to take pictures. All the different people, you know, would leave their station for a few minutes here and there to try to get pictures. And so this year they asked for a photographer, and they had two photographers. And I do photography a little bit, and so I said, well, I can do that. So again, there's something for everybody. I didn't necessarily support the events of that week like they did, but we got back and got pictures and sent the pictures out to the team, and so they can do presentations back to their congregations, kind of like what we're doing here. Ultimately, the medical part of this was a good work. Even if that's all we did, it was a good work. But that's not why we went. We went for the mission part of it. The medical part was certainly a good work, but we wanted more. In fact, one of the first nights, one of the leaders said, we're not here to baptize, we're here to convert. We wanted to make a difference in these people's lives, not just physically, but spiritually. And not just something temporary, not just dip them in water. We wanted to convert their lives. And I'll talk about one gentleman specifically who has a story. This is the church building in San Diego. It's actually not the front building that you see. It's the one in the back. Just a small cinder block building out back behind a chain link fence. There's a baptistry. And that gives you a sense as to what that congregation looks like, I guess, where they worship at least. The first picture I'm going to show you is Miguel. He's the preacher for that congregation. Now we're going to go through several of the preachers from Honduras, and you can see their name. It's important for you to know that there's a large number of native Honduran preachers and men and women who are involved in the campaign as well. All of these are preachers from different parts of Honduras. And every year they leave their congregations, and sometimes they leave their families. Some of their families may come with them, but they're on this campaign with us. And I don't think I really understood that before I got there, that we're really supporting them as they're supporting that one congregation. And it's really a concerted effort from all of these people working together. Of course, they know the language, and so it's easier for them to do Bible studies and start those kind of discussions. But they're in that country. They're toiling away every day. And when we come back to America and the air conditioning and, in our houses, they don't do that. They're still there. Now, we talked about the statistics. You saw all the statistics. There were a lot of people that we saw. A lot of prescriptions and a lot of glasses. But really, for every person that registered, that was a seed that was planted. For every person that was seen by a doctor, for every prescription, that was a seed that was planted. And those Honduran preachers, are still there. They actually had a follow-up in that congregation. We're praying for those seeds that were planted. We're praying that God will lead to the increase there and support that congregation. Out of all the people that you saw, as they went through the stations, they were asked if they wanted to have a Bible study. We had over 500 people that week who sat in on a Bible study. There was so many people wanted to have a Bible study. Sometimes we couldn't even do one-on-one Bible studies. We had to have a group study, which is fine. But there was a tremendous response to what we were doing. And ultimately, there were 8 new converts during the week. And there were 2 restorations. So that was the benefit. That was some of the results of what we did. I want to go through a standard day from the mission side of what we did. You've heard kind of the logistics and the setup and the medical part. So this is more from the spiritual side of what we did. Every morning we would gather for a joint English and Spanish devotional and song. So we'd spend a few minutes singing English songs, and then we'd sing Spanish songs. Well, I listened because I don't know Spanish. And then somebody, either an English speaking person or Spanish speaking person, would lead a devotional. There's always a translator. It was really interesting to get different people's perspective on what's going on. Just some different pictures of different mornings on what we would do. Again, the English and Spanish constantly being translated. Then we would close that morning devotional with a song, and we'd sing the same song every morning. And what was really interesting and even touching is that we would all gather in a big circle, and we would all hold hands and sing. And there was no difference in age or color or culture. Whoever you're standing beside, you grab their hand, and it was such a feeling of unity. And just that feeling of, this is the church. This is the church that Jesus died for. We may not be able to speak to each other, but we're working together, we're serving together, doing the Lord's work. And this was a big circle. You know, you saw the numbers. There's 95 of us. Most of those people were there in the morning. After the medical clinic would get going, people would go through the clinic, and those who wanted a Bible study would sit down, many times with a Spanish-speaking preacher from Honduras. So we had tables set up, and you can see some of the preachers are younger, some were older, just a variety of backgrounds for those Honduras preachers. But they would sit up at the tables and try to read the Bible and speak to them and just find out what their background is and eventually lead them to Christ. But we ran out of room. And at one point, we'd been moved over to the preacher's house. This is a chicken coop. They cleaned out the chicken coop and set up chairs and tables. That was the response. And it was just amazing to me to see people were waiting to go sit in the chicken coop to learn about God and learn about Jesus. And when you think, you know, would that happen here in America? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It was really interesting to see that. And of course, it led to baptisms. And it would be any time during the day. And you know, we'd all try to stop and come and gather around and support that person, sometimes their family, sometimes the preachers who'd been working with them. But we got to see and witness several new babes in Christ. Also during the day, there were evangelism teams. That's another option. If you like doing personal Bible studies, you have the option of doing that with a translator if you need that. But these evangelism teams, and there were several of them, they would gather up in the morning, get their game plan together, and head out. They'd usually go out for a few hours, come back for lunch, kind of reset, and then go back out. And they would just go out to people's houses. And generally, they were very welcomed. They didn't get doors slammed in their face. We had a very good response of saying, hey, can we study the Bible with you for a minute? The other photographer and I took turns going out with them. And this was the second or third day when I went out. Now look, I was born and bred in the South. And you know, California is almost a foreign country to me. I'd never been out of the States, and now I'm leaving the confines of our little compound area. You know, it's fenced in, and we went out walking just down the road. And it was an odd feeling for me. Partly personally, just feeling a little bit exposed. I'm in a foreign country. I don't speak the language. I don't, you know, even though we had a translator with us, and there was no issue. But partly because of what we were doing. And you know the story, you know, in the New Testament of how they would wash their feet because they were out traveling on the dusty roads. And I just had that image in my mind as we're walking down this dusty road. And it was just such a neat feeling. So I got to document some of this day's work, the evangelism team. This was the second day we'd studied with a girl named Nicole. She's 15 years old, and they studied with her family the day before, and she wanted to study more on the next day. So we stopped and studied with her. And one of the things they do when we study with the people, they say, do you have a Bible? You know, go get your Bible. You know, they didn't just, you know, read from our Bibles. They said, turn here and read this verse. And do you understand what that means? And so it was a very effective Bible study. We finished with Nicole and went down and literally just the next house and walked in and kind of around to the back. There were some women there, I guess, doing the daily chores. If you can tell on the right side, the big concrete block area, it held water. And the lady in the white, there's a concrete washboard. She was washing the clothes. And they were working. They were polite, but they did not have time. The only time that I was with them that somebody didn't have time or kind of chose not to do a Bible study. So we went to the next house and met a gentleman. His name is Erlian David. And I'll tell you his story a little bit. So everybody we went to was very welcoming. You know, they would bring out chairs, and you know, they took very good care of us while we were at their house. And so we started talking with Erlin, and of course he doesn't speak English, so I'm waiting for the translator, and all of a sudden it goes a long time where he's talking. It felt like 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 10 minutes, and then he's crying, and I'm just looking at our translator and saying, "Tell me what's going on. You know, I want to know what's going on with." And he kept going, and so finally the translator stopped, and he told us Erlin's story. And the story was that Erlin wants to be baptized. He wanted to be baptized, but he was single. And he was under the belief that you had to be married to be baptized. Now, he also had some sin in his life, and he shared that, and ultimately that was why he was crying. He had abused his girlfriend. He said that the last time he hurt her pretty badly. He pushed her into the wall in their house, and she hit her head on a nail that was in the wall, and it was bleeding badly, and it scared him. Well, yeah, that's tough. That's tough to hear and to see somebody admit that, but he's crying. He feels that. He knows he sinned. We're talking about baptism for the remission of your sins, but he says, I can't do it because I'm not married. And we said, well, you know, hold on. You know, you don't have to be married. Well, come to find out, he's living with his girlfriend. So there was a little bit of an issue that we had to work through. But we studied with him for over an hour. And it was emotional. He was emotional the whole time about it. And we closed, and I could see in his face that he was just torn between his current way of life and what he knew the Bible said. And he had some decisions to make. Either he was going to make a change in his life to do what the Bible said he needed to do, or he was going to not do what the will of God said. And I could see that in his face. And so I led a prayer as we finished. And it was emotional for me to be in that kind of a situation where somebody has a life-changing decision to make. Ultimately, I asked if we could take his picture, and that was the last time I saw him. And I just kept praying for him and wondering what in the world ever happened. When I got back home, I saw the pictures from the other photographer. Later in the week, he came to the clinic. He was baptized. And a week later, he got married. Now, I don't know what happened in between there. I assume everything was done in the right order. But he and his wife are now worshiping at the church in San Diego. And that's an amazing story to me on how this work, you know, just some guys from Tennessee can go down, and men and women from Oklahoma and Florida can go down and make a difference like that in somebody's life. This was Fernando. He was a teenager. He was the first person that was baptized that week. He ended up staying with our youth group. There's a youth evangelism team as well. He stayed with them from morning till night, doing whatever they did, getting to know them. He's still active in the San Diego congregation as well. We saw a picture that he's, I think, helping to serve the Lord's Supper in that congregation now. Some other pictures of our youth group. They would do different activities during the day, preparing some things to take to schools. We went back across the street to the elementary school. They were making bracelets. They want to give bracelets out. And the teachers would let us come in to the classroom. That's the inside of one of those open air classrooms that you see. We'd have a translator with us, but our young people would do a skit. We did 2 skits that week. One was the Walls of Jericho, and the other skit was about the Good Samaritan. So they would spend time working on those, and they had fun, and the kids just thoroughly enjoyed seeing us, and our kids thoroughly enjoyed interacting with them. During recess, they would come out. The boys would generally play soccer. Some of our boys would try to play soccer with them. They were amazing soccer players, even at 8 or 9 or 10 years old. And the girls would usually stand around. Some of our girls would teach them a fun little game. They could stand in a circle and do something simple, but just interact with them. Then one day, we decided to go to the high school. And I was free, and so I went with them. And it was a long walk up. And as we got closer, it was fenced in, but a lot of the students were starting to come to the fence. We were outside the fence, but we were feeling it was a little weird. They were making a lot of noise. As we got closer and closer, there were a lot of catcalls and whistling at some of our young ladies. And it became a little bit uncomfortable. I wasn't sure. Even the chaperone with us, he said, it'll be fine. The girls didn't care. The boys didn't care. Some of the boys actually were getting whistled at too, which was funny. Neither of them really cared. This was Jonathan in the red shirt. He's a local preacher, I think. But he was translating. We couldn't do skits. We couldn't interact with him as much. It was just a main gathering, just to, and we kind of talked to them about the clinic, invited everybody to the clinic. Then from there, we walked into the big city of San Diego. It has about 2 stores. We stopped at a little store, got Gatorade and Cokes, took a picture. Every night, there's a gospel meeting. It was held at the school across from the preacher's house, at the school where we started. But the gospel meeting encompassed several different things. There was a time of singing on the front end. There's some of the Honduras preachers. Then after the singing, we would break up into different groups. The young people would go and do an activity or a devotional just with the young people. There was another group for the new converts. There was a new convert class that would meet. And all of that while one of the local preachers was preaching to the rest of the campaign team, kind of encouraging them and so forth. We get back to the hotel at night. We would eat supper. You saw the spread of food that we had every evening. Then we would break up into men's devotionals and ladies' devotionals. And there was about 50. I counted in his pictures. There were about 50 men there. And again, it's English and Spanish. So everything's translated. If there's a Spanish preacher, then it would be translated into English, and of course vice versa. We had a couple of small group discussions, which were really interesting. Just a couple pictures of the layout. The last night there, we all got together as a team again, talked about the week, and stood around, held hands again, and sang a song together. And again, there were some tears that were flowing. Some strong friendships were forged in that week that we were there. And just the most incredible thing to me again was, there's no division between age or gender or culture, black or white or Latin or any of that. Everybody's together as one. This is our team from Birdwell's Chapel. It was a very rewarding experience. It wasn't always easy. It was very rewarding. But that was our team. That same team will never be there again in the same place. If we go back, it'll be at a different spot. But some of us may not be able to go back. Work schedules change. Things change. Some of us may not be able to go. So as our memories begin to fade, we have to ask, what's next? What's next for Honduras? What's next for those preachers who are spending their time supporting those campaigns year after year? Some of those preachers are supported only by Americans. And some of them are trying to live on the equivalent of $500 a month. That's tough. It's tough for these men to raise a family and find a place to stay and feed their family. What's next for them? What's next for the people who live down the road? For the Erlyn Davids? What's next for the new converts? Who's going to be there to support her? What's next for the preachers' wives as they're toiling along with their husbands? What's next for the people? We helped a lot of people. Something as small as an infection on a finger, we can give antibiotics and heal it. We helped a lot of people. And even if they didn't want a Bible study that week, they have a very good impression of the San Diego Church of Christ. And what's next for the children? So many children that we interacted with. They have a positive impression of the church, of the Lord's church. What's next for their parents? Who's going to be there? I hope that everybody in here will pray tonight for the work in Honduras. And I hope that some of you may choose to go next year. There's an opportunity for you to do that. And I hope that some of you may want to find out more information on how you can support some of those preachers financially. Thank you for your time. Dale?
Second Corinthians chapter 5, if you'd like to be turning there, 2 Corinthians 5. I was unable to go this year. I went last year, and this good congregation supported me in that. I came around this time last year and talked about the work there, and I got a call from Brother Terry, who knew we'd gone again and wanted to hear more about it. I really appreciate these good men for all that they do, and are looking forward to our trip next year, which we'd like to talk to you more about after the service. So why do we go? I think Brother Jason and Ken and JR, talked about why we go, and I hope that you see that. But I'd like to just throw my 2 cents in based on my experiences. Imagine that you live in one of the poorest towns in Honduras. And imagine you have a toothache, you can't do anything about it. There's no dentist who's nearby. There's no medicine that you can get or even afford. But you hear about a free clinic at a school nearby that's run by the Churches of Christ. You've heard of that. You've walked past the San Diego Church of Christ 24 times at least, but you think, it's not free. But somebody talks you into it and you're able to go, and there's somebody there who takes care of that tooth. And they even take care of it without hurting you. You think, is this a miracle? Who are these members of the Church of Christ? And imagine that you have a child who can't walk because of an illness that they were born with. And this child is getting bigger and bigger. They've outgrown the stroller that you've had, and you've been carrying them, but he's getting heavier. And you hear about, once again, from your friend with the sore tooth, you hear about how there's a free clinic going on, and there's a man there by the name of John Farber who's going to get you a stroller large enough to carry your son. What about that? It's free? You say nothing's free. The other church I go to down the street is always asking me for something. There's no way this can be free. But certainly it is. And imagine, lastly, that you are a bricklayer. There's a lot of construction that goes on in these cities, a lot of farming. A lot of men rely on their shoulders, on their legs to earn money for their families. And you've just injured your shoulder. You're not sure what you're going to do. The pain is getting worse. Us here in America, here in Macon County and Sumner County, we just go to the doctor, take a little Advil, we'd be all right. But your shoulder's getting worse. And you hear about a free clinic. You're not sure either. You've got your doubts. But you go and you check in, and they take your blood pressure, and they walk you over, and they introduce you to the physical therapist named Ken. He's the biggest American you've ever seen. But he sits you down, and he does some things to your shoulder, gives you some medicine, tells you some exercises you can employ, and in a few weeks, your shoulder's all better. You can keep right on working, thanks to the Churches of Christ. And maybe you go and you darken the door of the San Diego congregation, you get to know the preacher, and you're baptized. And that's made all the difference in your life. I love the story of Elon David that Jason talked about earlier. And he really focuses and takes to heart 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 17. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creature. He was at a battle with himself, you see. He had been blessed like the other people in my story. He had been blessed somehow. He had learned about baptism. He had learned about marriage. But he knew that this verse existed. The old things passed away. Behold, new things have come. Now all these things are from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. We can be reconciled. Our sins can be forgiven, but we have to change. And thankfully, some members of the Church of Christ went and talked to him about his soul and corrected some error that he had believed. And now there's a good Christian family down in San Diego, Honduras. That's why we go. I hope you'll be a part of that. I hope, though, however, you will also reconcile your own life. Take off the darkness, get away, not be the old creature anymore, but be the new creature that God has called you to be. And I hope that you'll start that this evening, that you'll come forward in just a moment. Ask for prayers if you need it. Ask to become a Christian if that's the case. We can assist you this evening. Won't you come now while we stand and sing?